Understood. Here's section 1 as a tightly written, 1,600-word narrative that introduces Captain Reese Calder, Lieutenant Dax Calder, and the initial central conflict surrounding Garrison 12. No headings, no asterisks, no fluff, just forward-driving storytelling with rich detail, clean pronoun use, and a hook that leaves the reader hungry for section 2. The courier ship drifted through the Vera Prime dockyard with the weary grace of an old war horse. Reese Calder sat in the passenger bay, boots planted apart, hands clasped loosely between his knees. The letter from the Galactic Court lay folded on the seat beside him, its red seal already cracked. He had read the words a dozen times since they were delivered, yet they still felt strange, like a joke without a punchline. Opposite him, Dax sprawled in the bench seat, one leg bouncing with restless energy. His gaze kept flicking between the viewport and the paper, as if the old station might materialize in the black beyond the glass. "Still can't believe they gave you a station," Dax said. "I thought they only handed out fines and debt notices." Reese's mouth curved in the faintest of smiles. "Not just any station. Garrison 12. The name seemed to echo in the small bay, hollow and cold. Dax gave a short, incredulous laugh. "That's the icebox out near Torrens Belt, right? The one they shut down before I was born?" 24 years ago, Reese said, voice low, as if speaking any louder might wake ghosts. "It was a forward post during the first contact wars. Then they sealed it. No public record of why." Dax smirked. "Sounds promising. I'm sure it's got a 5-star view and a working coffee machine." The shuttle gave a small lurch as it was swallowed by the pressurized docking tunnel. Outside, the dockyard's radio chatter was a background hum of mechanical voices, ship manifests, and half-drunken arguments between loadmasters. News of their inheritance had traveled fast. By the time Reese had signed for the keys, metaphorically speaking, every bar on the station had found a way to turn the story into a joke. Humans inheriting a derelict space base was apparently the funniest thing Vera Prime had heard all week. They disembarked into the dockyard concourse and immediately drew stares. Two humans in worn naval jackets walking with purpose through a place dominated by insectoid traders, scaled mercenaries, and silken-robed merchants were a rarity. A few aliens made no effort to hide their smirks. One broad-shouldered wreck clicked his mandibles and muttered to a companion, loud enough for Reese to hear. "Scrap pickers. Bet the reactor's already leaking." Dax's jaw tightened. Reese didn't break stride. They passed a news holoscreen. The anchor, an androgynous Lyran with eyes like chips of blue glass, was mid-laugh. And in other news, the Galactic Court has transferred ownership of Garrison 12 to a human war veteran. Local salvage crews predict it will be stripped for scrap within a month. The image cut to a slow pan of the station itself, a black, skeletal ring hanging in the shadow of a dying red dwarf. Entire sections of plating were missing, revealing lattices of trusses and frozen cables. The camera lingered on a drifting ice plume venting from a ruptured coolant line. "Looks like a corpse," Dax muttered. Reese glanced at the screen just long enough to see the glint of something buried in the darkness of the station's interior. It was probably nothing light on metal, but it caught his attention all the same. Their chartered transport was waiting in a far bay, a blunt-nosed freighter with a captain who didn't care why his passengers wanted to head for the belt. Credits were credits. The man barely looked at them before initiating undock procedures. The journey to Torrens Belt was 3 days of silence broken only by the freighter's engines and the occasional status chime. Dax spent most of the time in the navigation blister, staring at the slow creep of the red dwarf growing in the viewport. Reese sat in the crew lounge, reviewing what little was in the official files, schematics missing entire decks, supply logs ending mid-sentence, personnel rosters marked classified. On the final approach, the belt's dust clouds lit faintly in the dying star's glow, smearing the black with red and gold. The station emerged from the haze like a carcass caught in a web. It hung in perfect stillness, the geometry of its construction both human and foreign. There was a wrongness to it, angles too precise, shadows too deep in the void between its girders. Dax joined him at the viewport. "Doesn't look as bad up close," he said, but there was no conviction in it. The freighter's captain refused to dock, claiming the port seals were untrustworthy. Reese didn't argue. They took the shuttle instead, a dented cylinder barely large enough for the two of them. As it clamped to the outer airlock, a low groan echoed through the hull. The interior was worse than the exterior promised. Darkness swallowed them until their helmet lamps cut through the stale air. Dust motes hung motionless, undisturbed for decades. Every surface was coated in a thin frost, the cold biting through their boots. Strips of insulation dangled from the ceiling like shredded banners. They moved through the corridors in silence, footsteps muffled. In the main concourse, faded paint spelled out humanity holds the line across the curved bulkhead, half obscured by scorch marks. Reese ran his fingers over the letters. The paint flaked away under his touch. "Whole place smells like a tomb," Dax said, his voice low. "It was one," Reese replied. In the command deck, they found the old consoles intact but powerless. Reese examined the central station, an archaic model with manual switches and a cracked glass screen, while Dax wandered to the side panels. The younger man traced a network of wires into a corner access hatch. "Power conduits intact," Dax said. "Might be able to bring the main grid online." Reese hesitated. Something about the quiet here felt deliberate, as if the station wanted to be left sleeping. But Dax was already inside the hatch, reconnecting a bundle of cables. The deck lights flared, then dimmed to a flicker. Consoles hummed weakly, screens stuttering to life. One by one, systems displayed ancient error codes. Then, without warning, the central display projected a field of stars. The image was unstable, flickering like a heartbeat. Points of light shifted into a formation that was unmistakably a map. Entire sectors were shaded in red, others green. At the map's edge, a single blinking icon pulsed in amber, accompanied by lines of encrypted code that scrolled too fast to read. "What is that?" Dax asked. Reese leaned closer. The coordinates were partially familiar, somewhere beyond charted human space. The encryption was military-grade, decades old. No civilian station should have carried data like this. Before he could reply, the projection died, leaving only the dim hum of the consoles. The darkness seemed heavier than before. They left the command deck with the image burned into their minds. The rest of the station was a maze of sealed bulkheads and collapsed maintenance shafts. Graffiti covered some of the walls, crude and faded. "Last man out, turn off the lights, trust the black, not the orders, no one survives here." In the mess hall, they found overturned tables, a deck scarred by what looked like small arms fire. Personal effects, mugs, datapads, boots were scattered where they'd been dropped. No bodies. No signs of evacuation. Just absence. By the time they reached the habitation ring, the suit thermals were struggling. Frost covered the walls in intricate spirals, creeping in through hairline fractures in the plating. Through a viewport, the red dwarf glared at them, an ember in a sea of ash. Dax broke the silence. "You think that map was a glitch?" Reese shook his head. "That was deliberate. Which means someone left it here for us to find." "Or for no one to find," Reese said. They stopped in the observation lounge. The massive window looked out over the belt, the dust clouds drifting like the slow breath of some vast creature. Reese had seen this view once before, long ago, through a battleship's targeting array. It felt different now, emptier, yet weighted with something unspoken. Behind them, a relay clicked. A faint current rippled through the deck plates, and somewhere deep in the station, a machine started to hum. The sound was subtle but persistent, as if something ancient had stirred in its sleep. Dax glanced toward the sound. "That yours?" "No," Reese said. "And we didn't turn it on." The hum deepened, resonating through the metal like a heartbeat. Reese looked back at the dying star, then at his son. There was no humor left in his voice. "Whatever this place was, it's not done yet. If you want, I can immediately move on to section 2 so the momentum and tone carry seamlessly into the next part without losing the atmosphere. That will also let us maintain the pacing hook I set up here with the hum and the map. Would you like me to continue?" The hum had grown louder overnight. It was not a mechanical whine or the vibration of stressed plating but a steady pulse that seemed to radiate from the bones of the station itself. Reese had tried to trace its source, pacing the corridors in the dim light of his helmet lamp, but it was everywhere at once, as if the entire structure had been built to carry the sound. By morning, if such a thing could be said to exist here, Dax was crouched beside a junction box in the command deck, coaxing a trickle of power through the station's arteries. He had improvised an interface from a handheld diagnostic rig, splicing its cables directly into the deck's ancient data ports. "You're waking things up too quickly," Rhys said. "They're already awake," Dax replied without looking up. "We just can't hear most of it yet." Screens flickered to life one after another, their displays struggling to reconcile decades-old code with the modern translator in Dax's rig. System reports scrolled in bursts of garbled text. The environmental controls refused to register commands, but the internal sensors began mapping the station, room by room. A figure appeared in the central display, hazy at first, then sharpening into the outline of a human in the stark, angular armor of the First Contact era. The faceplate was expressionless, and the voice that emerged was metallic, clipped, but undeniably human. "Designation: Commander of Last Protocol," it said. "Recognition pattern confirmed." Rhys straightened slowly. "Identify yourself." "Centurion," the voice replied. "Autonomous Defense Intelligence, Garrison 12. Dax sat back on his heels, eyes narrowing at the projection. "An AI this old shouldn't even be running." "I persist," Centurion said. "Command authority restored. Awaiting orders." The words hung in the air, a relic of another war. Rhys felt an old weight settling across his shoulders, the kind he had thought buried with his commission. "Status of the station?" Rhys asked. "Partial systems online. Reactor stable. External defense grid offline. Hull integrity compromised in 9 sectors. Internal lockdown remains in effect under Omega containment order." Dax's gaze slid toward his father. "Containment of what?" "Classified," Centurion said. "Clearance required." Before Rhys could press, an alarm pulsed in the corner of the display, a proximity warning. The external cameras came alive with static, resolving into the image of a small, ugly freighter edging toward the station. Dax zoomed in. "Salvagers," he muttered. The freighter hailed them before docking range. The pilot was a scaled alien with eyes like polished stone, grinning with too many teeth. "We heard the human scrapyard's back in business. Thought we'd take a look before the vultures get the good parts." "This is private property," Rhys said evenly. The alien chuckled. "Looks abandoned to me. You going to stop us with harsh language?" Rhys didn't reply. He glanced at Centurion. The Ari's voice was calm. "Defense grid offline. Deception protocol available." Rhys nodded once. "Run it." The countdown's steady rhythm had become a constant presence, a quiet reminder that the station was on a path neither of them fully understood. Rhys had been through enough military operations to know that every timer in a war zone meant the same thing. When it hit 0, something irreversible happened. He had no intention of waiting for that moment without knowing what was coming. Dax was already running decryption routines on the encrypted coordinates. The algorithms in Centurion's archives were archaic but formidable, built to resist the best efforts of enemy intelligence. Lines of code streamed across the display, each progress marker slower than the last. "It's fighting me," Dax said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Like it knows I'm not supposed to be looking." "Because you're not," Rhys replied. "That order was meant for commanders with clearance high enough to start or end wars. You break it, you'd better be ready for what's on the other side." Dax didn't look up. "We already crossed that line when we stepped on this station." Centurion remained silent, its projection watching them both as if weighing their worth. The AI had become more conversational since they reactivated it, less a machine and more a presence, but there was a measured quality to everything it said. When the decryption stalled, Rhys made a decision. "We're going back to the shielded chamber." The corridors to that section were darker than before. Power had returned to certain lights and consoles in other areas, but here the shadows had grown heavier. The air was colder, the frost thicker along the walls. It felt as if the station itself wanted to keep them away. The welded doors were still sealed, but Dax had come prepared. He rigged a thermal cutter from salvage in the engineering bay and began slicing through the metal, the arc's glare throwing jagged shadows across the corridor. When the cut was complete, they forced the doors apart with the groan of warped hinges. Inside, the chamber was just as they had left it, vast, silent, and dominated by the towering cylinder in the center. Now, however, faint blue light pulsed within the seams of its armor, each pulse perfectly in time with the station's deep hum. "What is it?" Dax asked. Centurion's voice came through the comms, quiet but precise. "Prototype phase transition core. Final iteration. Humanity's last sanctioned jump device before the Accord ban." Reese stepped closer. "This isn't just a gate." "No," Centurion said. "It is the gate." Phase gates were not supposed to exist anymore. The Galactic Accord had outlawed them after the First Contact Wars, claiming their destabilizing potential outweighed any strategic value. The official history claimed all prototypes had been dismantled or destroyed. Yet here one stood, hidden inside a station abandoned on the fringe of known space. "What was it meant for?" Dax asked. "To relocate entire fleets instantly," Centurion said. "Across any distance. Without corridor drift, without temporal lag. Instant presence, anywhere." Reese had commanded ships that spent weeks crawling between systems, knowing that the time delay was as much a defense as a limitation. A weapon like this would erase that barrier. Armies could appear without warning, conquer before an enemy could rally, and vanish again before counterattack. Dax walked around the base of the core, running his hand over the smooth plating. "You could win a war in a day. Or lose one in an hour," Reese said. Centurion's tone did not change, but its words cut cleanly through the air. Garrison 12 was the keystone of the contingency network. If the war against the Karen turned, the Phase Corps would have moved the reserve fleets to every contested front within minutes. Victory was projected at 94%. But the war ended, Dax said. So they shut it down. They sealed it, Reese corrected. And buried the location. The blue light inside the core brightened, spilling across the chamber in shifting patterns. The pulses matched the timer's cadence exactly. "It's going to activate whether we're ready or not," Dax said. "Yes," Centurion said. 10 days from initial sequence. Unless overridden. They left the chamber with the weight of that knowledge pressing on both of them. Back in the command deck, the star map was still displayed, the blinking coordinate unchanged. But now Reese saw it differently. This was not a destination chosen at random, it was where the phase gate was already set to send them. Dax's decryption finally pushed past the first layer of encryption. Letters and numbers resolved into a set of coordinates, followed by a name. Reese read it twice before speaking. "That's not possible." The name belonged to a human colony wiped from official records 70 years ago. According to every public archive, it had been destroyed in the opening months of the First Contact Wars, its population slaughtered, its infrastructure burned. No one had gone there since. The hum had grown into a constant, low thunder that filled every corridor. It was not just in the walls now, it seemed to roll through the air, a vibration felt in the teeth and bones. Reese stood in the command deck, staring at the shrinking numbers on the countdown. Less than 2 days remained before the phase core fired. Around him, the consoles glowed with lines of code, power flows, and targeting grids as Dax worked at a speed that left no room for wasted movement. They had no illusions about what would happen before the timer reached zero. The Karen would not risk the gate falling into human hands. Already, the outer sensors were tracking multiple warp signatures bleeding into the belt. "How many?" Reese asked.